When doing an embossing application on a narrow web flatbed machine, I'm going to go over the different products that you're going to need to utilize in order to make it a successful job. So for an embossing project, you have an option of doing a copper embossing die, as shown here, and its corresponding counter. Or a brass embossing die and its corresponding counter, as shown here. As for the products to utilize to make it a successful and do proper make ready, I'll show you those now. First, your Duplaflex foil. Your spot make ready tapes. Your make ready float sheets. Yellow board. And tough film. Now that I've shown you all the proper tooling, let's see it in action. With brass dies, you can achieve a lot of different effects with all within one die. With a copper die, you can achieve a single level effect, either emboss or deboss. Please plan accordingly with what your customer is after and their desired effect on what type of embossing that they're looking for in their particular label. So now we'll lock down our brass embossing die. You want to make certain that your pressure is evenly distributed across the entire chase. Now that we have the die affixed to the chase, we're going to move on to our make ready and transferring the counter. I would recommend for embossing that you use the thinnest impression plate that you have if your machine offers it. Reason for this is because you don't know how much buildup that you're going to need to increase the pressure of the embossing. This will give you the ability to use more tools to build up that pressure to maximize the emboss out of the label. So now what we'll do is we'll screw in our impression plate. Okay, now that we have our impression plate affixed to the base, we'll now put on our make ready float sheet. The float sheet is a thin piece of mylar which the counter will adhere to. This is opposed to sticking the counter directly to the steel, which is also another option. However, when you stick the counter directly to the steel, you're limited on the amount of make ready that you can do actually underneath that counter. So by using a float sheet, this allows us for a little bit more make ready to happen underneath this after we create our envelope. The float sheet, a thin piece of mylar, allows this counter to nest directly into the cavity of the embossing die. And it's doing so because it allows for a tiny bit of movement so that it can seat in there. And we're only talking about very, very minimal movement, a thou to a couple thou. However, if you stuck it directly to the steel, it would have to be dead on with regards to the cavity of the die. And if it's off, then it's possible you may have to remount your counter, or it may you'll see cutting or bruising of the label stock. So we'll tape this down using our masking tape. Now that we have the float sheet attached, we're now going to put sticky back on the back of our counter. The counter is a very important piece of the embossing tool. The counter is the male, the die being the female. There are different thicknesses of counters that you can purchase: 60 thousandths, 30 thousandths, and 15 thousandths. We recommend the 60 thousandths as it gives you the most relief. We're going to use the flex bowl. Now what we'll use is our counter pins. The plastic counter pins are provided with every embossing die. strongly recommend using also a counterpin extractor. It's ideal to provide 2 counterpins per every image. Now that we've put in our final counterpin, we're going to move the backer off the sticky back tape. And utilize the counterpin holes and the counterpins to properly align the counter on top of the die. You want to nest it perfectly, utilizing the counterpins, guiding them into the corresponding holes within the die. Now that we have the counter properly affixed and nested on top of the die, we're ready to transfer it to the base or the top of the make-ready float sheet. Different presses have different ways of applying and transferring the counter. Please consult your instruction manual on your particular press on how to properly transfer the counter to the other side. It's ideal to have a sturdy base when you have to do something like this whenever you transfer the counter. Now that we've properly put our counter onto the base with the float sheet, we can now extract our counterpins and are ready to put these 2 bases in the press. All right, with this particular press, you can see we've already transferred the counter. Now we're going to load both bases, die and counter, independently of each other into the machine. You can see that the operator is wearing heat gloves. That's because in some cases, some operators like to put heat with their embossing. It allows the stock to form to the image a little bit better. We just ran our embossing, and I must say that the impression looked great right off the bat. This is something that's a little bit of a rarity. Generally speaking, you may have to do spot make ready and so forth, but on this one, we were able to just float the counter, use the brass embossing die, and get it to make a very nice impression. I would like to show you the spot make ready techniques though that can be used. First, as you can see, we still have our counter intact with our float make ready sheet. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a slit right along the side of the counter. Now it's ideal to anchor that tape down to the make ready so that you are able to pull this back out. And there you see it lays directly over the counter. Now what we'll do is we'll place this back in the machine, pull the machine on impression so that that impression shows up on our spot make ready sheet. We'll pull it back out and review what areas need to be built up to increase the pressure of the emboss. So now let's say for instance that we just want to build up in our trees area, the area where there are sculptured trees. We provide 3 different types of tape which are different thicknesses. I would recommend that you always start with a thinner make ready tape so that you can build up gradually and not build up all at once, because there is a possibility that you could build up too much at one time and then you'd have to come back and strip your make ready back down. So we'll start with the 1.5. So now we'll use our make ready tape to go ahead and apply and build up in the sculptured tree area that needed more pressure. I would advise using a rag or a squeeze bottle that allows you to apply a little bit of water to this tape so that it adheres to the paper. And slide our make ready sheet underneath our float sheet so that that properly aligns with the trees right underneath. What this gives you is the pressure being applied only to the tree areas and keeping your other areas as they were. This will allow more pressure to be built up in the trees so that they have more pop in the emboss. Now we'll put it back in the press and review our results with the make ready tape in that desired area.